lecture is still on the 60s. We're picking up where we left off in the 60s. We're going to be talking just about what various women are doing in the 1960s, and also a push for kind of the equal rights fight, and still fighting for power and definitely equal rights in this lecture. Okay, so getting into the 1960s, professional women, just overall general professional women. More women were obtaining higher degrees than ever before. More women were going into law school and medical schools, and also PhD programs. From 1940 to 1960, professional women had increased by 41%. But having said that, women will get jobs as in professional jobs, but they're not in decision-making positions or decision-making power. So they'll be doctors, but they won't be chief of staff. They'll be doctors, but they won't be head of a department. And so it's kind of taking that step forward, and so it's a good thing, but it still shows that they still have a ways to go. And then another thing in the 60s, even with professional women, there was still a societal expectation that they would eventually leave and have children. And like the fact is that if you were going to have a family, then you chose between your profession and family, and the overall consensus in society was that you would choose the family and the kids. So you still would have professional women that might be a professional woman for a period of time, but when she started a family, that would supersede the profession. So there's still that there's still that feeling in the United States in the 1960s. Other professional women, Maria Mayer, 1963, is going to be the first woman or first American woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize for theoretical physics. Okay, so that's Maria Mayer, M-A-Y-E-R, that's 1963. She's going to be the first American woman to win a Nobel Peace Prize for theoretical physics. Now, she is the second woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize, and that is after Marie Curie, and that she's a French woman, or living in France. I believe she's Polish, living in France. Anyway, military, and I know I'm going backwards in time on this one. But anyway, so the military. 1948, President Truman is going to sign what's known as the Women's Armed Forces Integration Act. And that will actually make the Women's Corps a permanent part of the military. So it's not that women just volunteer for military service during war. If a woman wants to be in the military, she can now do so after 48. And also, President Truman is also going to sign in the Integrated Armed Service Act that will desegregate the military. Okay, now getting back to women, 22,000 women will serve in Korea and 11,000 will serve in Vietnam. And then that's actually in Korea and actually in Vietnam, and there will actually be more that will be in the military stateside during those wars. 92% of the women served in the medical corps, meaning as RNs. Okay, moving away from that, kind of some reform-mindedness and what's going on, some programs going on. In 1965, President Johnson is going to create what's known as the Great Society. It's also known as the War on Poverty, and it's his domestic policy. And it's really trying to put money and aid to getting people out of poverty. One of the programs within the Great Society is what's known as the Head Start program. The Head Start program is literally a Head Start program for children going into education. So those that really haven't had a huge amount of education at home, and they feel, or your school system would feel like they would have a hard time in kindergarten, you can get them enrolled in a Head Start program, and it's kind of like a quasi preschool before kindergarten. It's basically trying to prep them for kindergarten, so they can kind of be all at the same level when they get into kindergarten. The reason why I mention this is that majority of, or I should say a lot of the women will be working in the Head Start programs. So that's definitely, it's helping society, and you also see many women being teachers and facilitators with the Head Start program. The Head Start program also offered health and social psychological services for children, and it was a way to enrich kind of the preschool experience for impoverished children to get them on the same page when they were going to go into kindergarten. Okay, this is just an organization that is formed. You'll have the Women Strike for Peace. It's just an organization that forms. It opposed nuclear weapons. It opposed war. In 1961, they have a very large protest in over 60 cities across the country. 1960s, I would say mid-60s, you're going to start to see an environmental wave, and it's the beginning of an environmental wave. And you definitely see women involved in the environmental movement. It's a wave that starts in the 60s, I would say mid-60s, and then that environmental wave gets much bigger in the 70s. 70s is kind of environmental is very strong. It's kind of like the first green wave, if you will, and women will definitely be a part of that. Okay, now moving on to another issue in the 1960s, because there's so many issues in the 60s, and this is really about the feminist movement in the 60s. 1965, you're definitely going to see, well, it started in 63 with the feminine mystique, but then 65, you see more of a formal organization for the modern feminist movement, okay? And what's going to happen in 65 is you're actually going to have a group of women in Washington, D.C. They meet in Washington, D.C. It'll be a group of 28 women, and they're actually meeting in a hotel room in Washington, D.C. One of them is Betty Friedan. She's the one that wrote the Feminine Mystique. Another one is going to be Gloria Steinman. Gloria Steinman is a journalist at this point in time. And those two women and 26 other women are going to meet in a hotel room in Washington, D.C. in 1965, and they're going to create an organization. It's called NOW, N-O-W, and it's the National Organization for Women. And they're basically kind of sitting in a hotel room talking about all the things that they would like to see happen in the United States and happen to see for the feminist movement. And they're like, well, let's just do it. We're all here. Let's just form an organization. And not only are we going to form an organization, let's talk about the things that we want to do and that we want to achieve. So the issues of now that they want to achieve, and these are kind of the things they're going to focus on, is addressing issues, or at least getting issues out into mainstream society where people can talk about them. The idea of choosing between marriage and motherhood, and kind of that working and profession issue. They spoke about ending the promotion of the idea of what's manly and what's womanly, and also raising children and in a certain manner. Vowing to bring women into full participation into mainstream society now. And OW, that's where they really get it. They also talk about a true equal partnership with men in society. Then they also talk about ways to achieve all the above mentioned things. They also talk about effective birth control, really promoting that. Also talked about paid maternity leave, tax deductions to help cover childcare costs and daycare costs, and then also job training. So there's a lot of things that they talked about. I mean, it's not just one thing or one direction. So there's a lot of things that they talk about, and talking about how to achieve those things. Now, that's in 65, okay? Now, moving on into 67, the same organization now is now going to talk very strongly and adamantly that they would like to put ERA on their agenda, that they want to push for ERA in society, and that's the Equal Rights Amendment. Alice Paul, as we know, tried to do that in like 23, and then it was kind of a dead issue. And now they basically want to bring that back and basically kind of promote this Equal Rights Amendment. So in a sense, that's kind of their agenda, and this is kind of this momentum of momentum of feminism, kind of modern feminism and feminism in the 60s. Okay, now that's kind of the major organization, but there will be other organizations that will also then follow suit. You have the Women's Equality Action League, the Women's Equality Action League, the Professional Women's Caucus, the National Women's Political Caucus, and the National Women's Political Caucus addresses political concerns for women and also encouraged women to run for office. So it's really trying to get women to become more politically active on a kind of a just an everyday level, but then active actually to actually get into political office. And so you've got a lot of organizations really developing and really trying to get this momentum going and for women to get involved. Okay, now there's also, when you talk about, I'm kind of moving away from that. I'm kind of talking about things just going on in society. Okay, women, and especially like women of now, are going to talk about it. Okay, and women in their organizations are going to talk about it. And one of the things they talk about is advertising and the media and how women are portrayed in advertising and media, but also how our women are portrayed also like on the big screen and on TV movies or TV shows, that type of thing. And there's a huge amount of criticism of how women are portrayed. When you look at advertising, because advertising is really gearing towards women because they're the main consumers, there tends to be this happy housewife persona of women in advertising, whether it's on TV or whether it's in the newspapers. And it's basically women are like shown to be very happy because they have a brand new mop and they have a new product, waxing product and cleaning and waxing product, and they have their new mop. And they're just ecstatic because they can keep their floors shiny and clean. But the fact is women are like, are you really happy mopping a floor? It's like, no, that does not make me happy. And that's what these women in these various organizations are really trying to address, is that we have to change that persona of women in advertising. Okay, but they'll also say to do so, women have to be a part of media and advertising, because the people who are writing the advertising campaigns are men. And they're saying if we can get women into advertising and into the media, then maybe women would be portrayed differently. Okay, another one is about, you'll have the founding of an organization called the Women's Institute for Freedom of the Press in Washington, D.C. You'll have another organization that will form. It's called the Women's Institute for Freedom of the Press in Washington, D.C. And this is really about addressing the changes of women in the media, or how women are perceived in the media. And they definitely still have like a long way to go with that. But it's the fact that you got to start somewhere. They kind of acknowledge it, and then they have to start somewhere. Okay, now I'm going to move on to another subject. I told you there's a lot of different subjects for the 1960s for women. So I kind of want to touch and kind of make sure I kind of touch all my bases on different issues. Another issue, and another, in a sense, kind of hot issue that's going to basically come up, is going to be the abortion issue. And we know that's always been an issue when you talk about birth control and abortion. That's always been around for centuries, if you will. But that is also going to come up. Now, that is actually going to come up in the 1970s. Okay, and I know I'm still talking about the 60s, but I'm actually going to address it here. Women wanted more control over their bodies. They wanted a partnership with their doctors to make decisions, and they just flat out wanted more control over their bodies. So you're going to have a landmark Supreme Court case, and this is Roe versus Wade, and this is a PowerPoint. Roe versus Wade, ROE. versus Wade, W-A-D-E. And this is actually it was a Texas ruling, okay, at the time, and then it'll go to the Supreme Court. And it will basically argue for the legal right to have an abortion. And so with Roe versus Wade, it basically overturned state laws that prohibited abortions during the first trimester or the first 12 weeks of pregnancy. Okay, it's going to prompt, obviously, it's not even a national debate. It's a debate that there's going to be very heated conversations about this. Roe versus Wade, in a sense, is still controversial today. They will still, every once in a while, you'll hear about Roe versus Wade coming up, especially with the conservatives. They'll kind of bring that up. But Roe versus Wade is definitely a landmark case, and it's a landmark case for feminists that they won. And so this is definitely a PowerPoint, and just so we're totally clear, it overturned state laws that had prohibited abortion during the first trimester or the first 12 weeks. So it's now legal for an abortion in the first 12 weeks of pregnancy. It definitely, as I said, it's going to create very heated discussions, creates a huge reaction with those opposing abortion. But also what's very interesting is Roe versus Wade, it's a landmark case, and it's obvious why it gets the media attention. But on the exact same day as Roe versus Wade, there was another court case that actually was decided by the Supreme Court, which also gives more power to women. And that is going to be the court case of Doe versus Bolton. It's D-O-E versus Bolton, B-O-L-T-O-N. And Doe versus Bolton basically overturned an abortion law in Georgia, and it got rid of Georgia's restrictions. And Georgia's abortion restrictions was that there had to be a medical approval, and then it reduced requirements for an abortion. And this is also still a landmark case if you think about it from what the women are gaining when you talk about Doe versus Bolton. But you never hear about it because they took Roe versus Wade and they ran with it, and that's what got all the media attention. But those two cases are landmark cases. And so those are really two major cases in a sense that women are going to win at this point in time. And they were basically, it was the exact same day that both cases will be decided and the decisions came out. Okay, now I'm going to move on. Moving on to other things, because I told you there's lots of things to talk about. In the 1960s, late 60s, you're going to start to see the rise of women's studies. Okay, women are basically asking, where are the women in history, right? I take a history class, and you learn about George Washington, and you learn about Grant, and you learn about Eisenhower, and you learn about all the men, and they say, well, where was women in history? But then you also step back, and then you say, well, where are the women in science, and where are the women in literature, and where are the women basically everywhere? Because when you go to college, in a sense, all you learn about any type of school, all you learn about are really about the men. And so there's going to be a huge push for what's known as women's studies. Women's studies are going to look at women in all various aspects of life. And it can be from a United States point of view, but it can also be from a world point of view. Okay, so just for example, okay, you're going to see women looked at in history, literature, psychology, psychiatry, environment, just all that things, literature, writing, all that good stuff. Now, colleges are definitely going to be stepping up. By 1972, or let me back up, 1969, San Diego State had the first BA program in women's studies. And that's 1969, so that's right on the edge, and they were definitely right on the cutting edge. So San Diego State, 1969, had the first BA degree in women's studies. 1972, you have American colleges and universities offered more than 600 women's courses. By 1974, that number will actually increase by over 2,000. And by 1989, you'll have over 30,000 courses offered about women's studies. So, and I know 1989 is still a long time ago, but now, and if you fast forward to today, women's studies is, you can easily get a degree in women's studies, whether it's an AA or whether it's a BA, an MA, or a PhD. You have to, it might be a little selective on what schools you go to, but that's with any type of major. Not every college is going to have every major. But my whole point is that you can easily find something if that's what you're looking for. And here at RCC, I know that they're working on a women's studies program. Okay, moving on from that, you will have in 1977 International Year. I'm not saying this right. International Women's Year Conference in 1977. International Women's Year Conference in 1977. It's going to be held in Houston, Texas, and it's basically inviting women from all walks of life, all races of life, all walks of life, and they created what's referred to as the National Plan of Action. And what they talked about in this conference is going to basically be dealing with all the issues that kind of women deal with, such as poverty, insurance, getting insurance, homemakers, health, equal rights amendment, employment, education, disabled women, childcare, abuse, all different types of issues. Now, when you talk about this, okay, nothing really comes out of it. You're not going to have anything like major come out of this conference, the International Women's Year Conference. Nothing's going to like major come out of it. But what they're doing is they're opening up a discussion, and they want these things to be discussed. They want these things to basically be in society, and that you discuss them, and maybe some women would be interested in pushing the boundaries with some of these issues. And also you have to hand it to them for having women from all different walks of life and all different ethnicities at this one conference. Okay, now we've been talking about let me talk about this. Let me talk about two other ones, and then we'll start to I'll introduce one other subject. Another thing, 1972, President Nixon is in office. President Nixon is going to veto what's known as the Comprehensive Child Development Bill, which would have provided a national or nationwide daycare center for employed mothers. So in 1972, Nixon is going to veto what was known as the Comprehensive Child Development Bill that would have created a nationwide daycare center for employed mothers. And he will defend his ruling or his actions. He said that he argued that it would have created a communal approach to child rearing. I bet, who does he think takes care of the kids anyway? I mean, you've got working women and they've got to have child care. Who do you think takes care of the kids? He's, in that sense, definitely on the more the conservative side. He just doesn't get it. Okay, then we're going to fast forward into 1981, 1985. President Reagan in office, he will refuse to enforce and I just lost my train of thought. The AA actions, well, let me go back. Another thing he'll cut spending to social welfare programs such as aid and dependent. He'll cut spending to social welfare programs such as aid to dependent children, and he will. I'm going back to my other one. He will refuse to enforce affirmative action programs or affirmative action laws. He just won't enforce them. They'll still be on the books, but he won't enforce them. And then he'll also cut spending to social welfare programs, aid to which a lot of women will be caught up in with the aid to dependent children. President Reagan's philosophy in life was people should take care of themselves, not the federal government taking care of people. You basically got to step up and take care of yourself. Okay, Now, I think that is where I'm going to end this lecture. It's actually a short lecture. And then I'm going to pick up basically the 70s on the next one because we're kind of already edging into the 70s. And then I'll pick up the 70s in the next video.